It's funny. Out of nowhere, like, people have, like, they say, like, something's like a core memory. Like, all of a sudden something will just start boring into your freaking head. And
Mm-hmm.
you're just like, wait, where the hell have I heard this before? Yeah, that happened to me with, of all things, a little known YouTube channel by the name of Epic Rap Battles of History. Old heads may know.
Yes.
And specifically, it was one of the actual battles that I saw just to, turn Richard over in his sarcophagus real quick.
Oh dear.
Back in 2011, 2012, no, I think it was 2011, when I was a literal child. And it was one of their very first, and it was the one they did of Benjamin Franklin versus Billy Mays. And it has been embedded in my head for the better part of what is now 14 years. Good Lord.
That's frightening to think about.
It is. And I went back and I listened to it, and it is still one of the funniest freaking things I've ever heard in my life.
I think I remember that one. There was a whole period of history that I had forgotten about until you just mentioned it, where Billy Mays and the slap chop guy were all over the place. I can only assume there's an epic rap battles of history of the slap chop guy as well.
Well, actually, that's the funny part. That is the twist. They actually have Billy Mays die of a heart attack mid-battle, and Vince Hoffer comes in to finish the job with some of the funniest bars.
Okay, that's awesome.
I literally remember seeing this on like a public library computer and just laughing my freaking head off. And it just stuck in my brain for like ages. And then when I went back, I wound up just binging through everything. Because here's the thing, a lot of their battles are like literally 2-3 minutes. Some of them don't even hit 2 minutes. Like, some of them are crazy short, which makes for a great deal of, just makes it so easy to just kind of whip through them one after the other.
Yeah.
And the more I kept going down the rabbit hole, the more I was like, good God. These guys, I mean, obviously not everyone's going to stick in your head.
Mm-hmm.
But when they hit home runs, good God, they hit home runs. I mean, I think about things like Teddy Roosevelt versus Winston Churchill, which has this hysterical ragtime piano on the beat. I think about, famously, they've done battles for every election since 2012, with the 2012 one being I think their most watched video ever. And somehow managing to make Mitt Romney seem more enthused than he ever seemed on the campaign trail. Yes. And my favorite of the recent ones, which is like the crowning victory of them as like a nerdcore institution, is they did a battle between I still can't believe they managed to pull this off and make it rock the way they did. They did a battle of Godzilla versus King Kong.
Okay.
And I'm not joking. The guys behind it, Nice Peter and Epic Lloyd, literally got up in motion capture rigs and motion captured models of Godzilla and King Kong. And the craziest part is they go deep on the references. Peter's going ballistic in his flows. Mm-hmm. And I'm just watching this in awe, being like, how the hell is this as good as it is? And then I look down at the date, and it's 2023. These guys have been at it for a decade and a half, and they're still making battles to this day. They're not as frequent anymore because of kind of COVID completely disrupting their production schedule, and I think it's season 6, and I think they're either flowing right into season 7, or this is just like getting the last of the order for season 6 done. But they're still breaking them out, and they're doing damn good work on like all fronts: production, music, performance. They're still doing live shows. They just dropped a vinyl album that sold out. They did a vinyl compilation that sold out in like a millisecond.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny too, because you don't see them, in the algorithm anymore per se. It's like this. One of the few things I would actually dare call an institution of YouTube, and they're it. ERB is it.
Well, I think also, to go back to your initial experience, there's a few of these, and it's very funny how common this is, whether you're talking about YouTubers or like I was watching an interview with an indie game dev, and it's the same thing. Same with authors, but oftentimes you'll get the it's an overnight success. Wow, they just suddenly blew up. And it's like, well, if you look back, they've been working at this thing for 5 years, getting progressively better at it over time. And it's one of the things that is interesting to me about YouTube is that it seems like most of the genuinely big names, at least it used to be the case, you'd look back, I would say probably 5 years ago or so, a lot of the genuinely top names were relatively organic, in the sense that these were people who just put their head down and worked at something that they weren't even necessarily 100% sure if anybody else wanted it. They just wanted to do it. And so you have this unique first generation, I would say, coming out of the YouTube sphere that I don't see replicated as often with the newer up and comers. There's just too much. There's a little bit. People understand how the magic works a little bit too much now, I think.
Well, I think what's also interesting too is that you are able to. You still have niches. Like, I think the most important takeaway in kind of the world of, online, say it with me now, content creation, as I fade away into the ether.
Mm-hmm.
Niches have always been around, but it always felt like there was always that homebrewed element. There was always that, standard definition to the high def, hyper produced type of, content. Like, my favorite example that I like to give people, and it's an incredibly esoteric one, and it also wholly betrays my own youth. I say as if I'm rocking a pimp cane at the ripe age of 62. But I used to watch, as an actual kid, videos made by fans of a little-known show some might have heard of and may even have grown up on, called Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. And it's one of those uniquely democratizable type of properties because it's about trains. It's about this unique island off the coast of England with these magical steam locomotives and all this wonderful stuff. But because it's model trains, and of course the people who are in charge of the marketing side of that series were always incredibly smart about getting toy lines of all stripes into stores. Mm-hmm. From genuine like model trains to, wooden railway toys, die-cast toys, and things like that. It allowed for people to kind of just tell their stories however they wanted. And I remember, and it's one of those things that you're surprised hasn't been overwritten by, like, the entire Motorhead discography, or the entire filmography of some, like, some Lithuanian cinematographer. The fact that I still remember this stuff boggles my mind. But I remember it was everything from the semi-satirical, like there was a fellow by the name of Captain Punjab who did a show, Thomas the Bachman Engine, which, as the name suggests, was done with the Bachman HO scale models.
Mm-hmm.
I know there were many very earnest attempts at kind of capturing the old model series that ran from about 1984 to, I think, before HIT took over, it was 2000. I think HIT took over at the turn of the millennium, but the classic series, most people say, goes from like 1984 to 03, so about the first 7 seasons. Trying to capture that sort of magic. And there are fellows, I mean, I literally remember people who made shows that are like no longer like available, like no one even bothered to archive them. There was a fellow, Dan Snell, who did one series, Adventures on Sodor, that you can only find on Daily Motion, because this was back when Daily Motion was seen as a credible competitor to YouTube. I mean,
yeah, back in the old days.
We're talking old, old days. And he actually went and did another series with his updated layout under, I think on YouTube it was called The Railway Modeler, and they were actually good-looking videos, and the channel's just gone.
Mm-hmm.
Just wholly gone. And the funniest thing about it, too, is that now we've gone from all these rinky-dink things to like this surprisingly artisanal approach you find with some, model makers. You almost see kind of things growing and growing and growing in terms of skill and craft. Like people making better sets, creating more dynamic set pieces, like using actual like filmmaking techniques. And kind of the coup de grace of this transition is someone actually did a recreation of the show's actual style, because for those who don't know, the original series was made with what are called gauge 1 models, which we're talking bigger than your Lionel O scale, bigger than your G gauge. Yeah. These things are big models. And someone through the help of a incredible rogues gallery of talented filmmakers and model makers recreated that show's style in true to production gauge 1. It's a piece called The Good Old Days, appropriately enough, and it is astonishing. And the funniest thing too is that this niche exists and almost kind of perseveres because of the fact that it's anchored around something with as passionate a fan base, young and old, as a property like Thomas. So it's kind of inoculated from, the ravages of time and the algorithm and all these other, sordid things. Like similarly with ERB, you wouldn't expect something like them to even have made it this long and to still hit millions of views with each video that's no more than 2 or 3 minutes a shot. And yet, every time they come out swinging, and they always stay relevant. It's incredible. And I think also some of that is kind of, you get the sense that they are eyeing for longevity rather than short-term gains, because they had done the grinding phase where they were publicly doing, I think those first 5 seasons were always almost end to end, like year in, year out. They were getting big celebrities. They were working with, good gosh, Key and Peele before Jordan Peele, became an Oscar-nominated filmmaker. They were working with, guys like Snoop Dogg, T-Pain, like major rap artists of the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s. And, I think the most impressive thing about them is the fact that even in their election raps, they managed to have some balancing agent in there that almost kind of makes it feel like, oh, okay, you're doing this on like a completely separate plane from like the real political, sociological things that are happening. It's like they create a space where people can just have fun with the idea. And I think it has ensured their longevity. I think those guys can keep making this as long as they're breathing. Like, honestly. Because I know Peter does have a family now. because I know he has a couple of kids.
Well, I think,
and I know that changes a man when you
very much
with any
so.
project.
Yeah, and especially whenever the fame or the job of YouTube starts to come in contact with your family, which is inevitable to a certain degree. I was actually just today I caught a YouTube video from a fellow who I was vaguely aware of, and I'd only watched a little bit of his stuff, but he was very well loved, like almost 15 million subscribers, Outdoor Boys, and apparently he's basically quitting, at least taking a large break, because he has 3 small children, and he's starting to get to the point where he goes places and people come up to him, and I know that there's other YouTubers that have quit due to stalking of family members and just other weird stuff that sometimes happens. And I think that sometimes there's some YouTubers that and other content creators, shall we say, who get into it as a dabbling of the hobby without necessarily having something that they personally are really invested in. And also, sometimes people just change, like you said, get married, have kids, all that jazz. But I think one of the interesting phenomenons of the YouTube era and just this more decentralized media in general is like actually seeing this without having a PR person out front or a management company or contractual obligations that sort of even out those humps that might occur, because there's some people where you got to wonder, would you I can't remember where I heard this before, but somebody said, if you think you're going to quit, write down that you want to quit. And then, if you still want to quit in 6 months, then no matter what else is going on, you need to quit, kind of thing. And not everybody is necessarily that disciplined. And contracts will run for much longer than that. So some people in the professional world, shall we say, which is kind of funny to even call it that, because in many cases these YouTube stars and whatnot are bigger than a lot of professionals. But would these same decisions be made if they had been managed by a professional organization or anything like that? And I think not. But that's part of what is so different about new media in general, is the you get a much you get not only the content, in a lot of cases you get the content as well as the creator as kind of a shared connection. You know what I mean? People can be invested in both parts of the product overall, I would say.
No, absolutely. It is it's one of the great colloquialisms that kind of has arisen over the past, I'd probably say half decade, give or take, and that is the idea of the parasocial relationship, the kind of the one-sided attachment to someone who engages in a semi-intimate fashion with their audience, whether it's as live streamer, whether it's as just directly addressing the audience in your videos, creating that kind of that personal connection. And in some cases, it even works in kind of the both ways, where it's sometimes it's the creator relying on the idea of the audience always being there, even if, they're nose to grindstone, for like 5 years straight, just making video after video after video. Because I know I had sent you a documentary that was made a couple of years ago, How Did We Get Here, about Jacksepticeye and a tour he did in 2017, 2018. And one of the things he mentions is that we moved...
Was it then or later? I'm not sure. Maybe it was back in 2018.
The tour I remember. The film didn't come out for a couple of years afterwards, but the tour itself was 2017, 2018.
Oh, okay.
And the thing he mentions in it, but the thing he mentions in it is that he literally did not go outside short for, grabbing groceries for like several years on end. He was just nose to grindstone, video after video, let's play after let's play, just kept building and building and building. And then he mentions that one funny moment where out of nowhere he's going, I think he said he was going into like a Tesco's, which for the Yanks, of which there are likely many in this audience, that is a popular chain of British store. Leave it to my Anglophilic mind to remember such details. And he literally runs into two boys that are like, "Hey, are you Jacksepticeye? From YouTube?" And he's like, "They found me." It's such a funny moment, especially the way he tells it. And it's also kind of an example, too, of the kind of person that can kind of, the old macho man adage, "The cream rise to the top, oh yeah."
Yep.
You see the kind of charisma sometimes it takes to really create that level of an engaging, fun, connective kind of environment, the way Sean creates with his channel. And I remember feeling kind of the same way about Markiplier back in the day, because I remember watching his Let's Plays, all the time. I think it was his Alien Isolation one that really got me, and also got me interested in the game, which, scares the pants off me every time I play it.
Yeah.
And it's funny, too, just kind of thinking back to them and just thinking back to kind of it's not necessarily the persona you put on per se, but just kind of the person you become in the moment when you're playing these games. I know people kind of joke about the, Let's Players screaming at jump scares thing, but you also get a feel for them when they're not playing those types of games, when they're just doing... Because I know in the documentary on Jacksepticeye, the big thing that was given the most focus was as far as game titles were concerned, was Happy Wheels, and it's part of this very funny section of his show where he actually brings on a kid from the audience, and essentially he demos what it's like being a YouTube Let's Player in front of a live crowd. And it creates this brilliant moment of kind of taking the screen away from everyone, or at least the barrier of the screen away from everyone, and showing the audience directly in front of the creator. And I think it's also kind of sobering to sit down and see it put that way. Because it's one thing, whenever we're making videos, anyone who's ever, walked this mile, you always get obsessed with the number counting, the views, the retention rates, the subscriber counts. And you never stop to think what it would feel like if you got that many people, even 100 people, in the same room to watch you do something for like 15 minutes, a half-hour demonstration. Like, no one thinks about that. And to think most of those shows were a fraction of Sean's international audience as Jacksepticeye is crazy. Especially when you're looking at like a packed theater house and it's just thousands of people here to watch this Irish guy from the middle of nowhere chat for about 90 minutes. And they're there and they're locked in because they love the man he's become through what he's done with his channel.
Yeah, well, I was a bit, I was too old for the, to kind of ride the wave of Let's Players, that first wave with Jacksepticeye and Markiplier and PewDiePie and whatnot.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny to see that because when I was still in the my formative teen years, it was still very much a case where I I mean the internet. I don't want to say the internet didn't exist in real life, but if you had an acquaintance online, like it was still very weird to have an online friend. And it's similarly like you would not think of that kind of dynamic that people have with streamers and these communities that form around them. It's it's still kind of an somewhat of an alien experience. And I think that but obviously all this changes. It's just like online dating used to be only for the most bizarro of people, and now it's overwhelmingly the primary way that most dating occurs these days, I suppose. And or at least it was at one point in time, and I haven't bothered to check the data. But I think that the ones that really hit the hit the highest points, like Jacksepticeye. For example, you can see with him being willing to take things on the road and his engagement with fans that um, he's much more of a performer by nature. Um, whereas I also kind of wonder about some of the uh, downstream, some of these people who they still have, 100. It's bizarre to think about, but there's so many channels that have like 100,000 subscribers and they can pop 100,000 views. And to think about how many people that is really, compared even to a lot of traditional media, for what kind of effort and at least financial input is required. It's the media landscape is just very different, and I think there's still a lot of things shaking out in terms of what um, I don't know what exactly I would say, but there's still a lot of things shaking out as far as the social implications and how people handle these things. Okay, because we're still kind of going through these first iterations of a new community building.
And I
So,
think what's also interesting, though, is the fact that it still hasn't taken the power away from some of the older mediums.
mhm.
Like, I say all of this while at the same time wholeheartedly believing that content creation, and I mean, as we understand it, whether it is YouTube videos or the short form onslaught of like Reels and TikTok, is objectively the lowest form of media, especially because of the way we talk about it. We talk about it in pure mechanical, economical terms:
Mhm.
content creation, generating views, revenue, what have you.
Mhm.
And how the mediums that I tend to engage in more thoroughly and feel more fulfilled by: film, even television, which of course was the boogeyman for years. I mean, I think
Yeah.
one of the funniest things you'll ever hear, to go back to merry old England and the United Kingdom, is that boomers were infamously told that commercial television was like the great Satan
Mhm.
of broadcast. Only watch the BBC, which is a laugh riot considering the state of the company today. But the idea that you're only allowed to watch the public television. The commercial television will rot your brain out your ears and everything. So it's like we've had phases where where each new innovation in media has been met with some scorn, some adversity, some rejection. But having also lived with, and I mean lived with, because I get to say this as a Zoomer,
Mm-hmm.
even though I do not act, sound, or speak like one. I get to say that having lived with this new media era, having connected through YouTube, not just, finding, oh, these are creators I like, but actually finding things that I wouldn't be able to otherwise. Like, I joke about, tonight we're watching rare Estonian animation,
Mm-hmm.
or hey guys, check out my German AOR collection. I joke about these things, but at the same time, 20 years ago, you know how I'd have to get, German AOR? It was either Scorpions or I imported some random band from clean out of nowhere. And even then, it's not likely possible that some chucklehead in the middle of nowhere would be able to get their hands on, I don't know, pick a random band, literally make up a random band name at that point. Like, I one of my favorite projects of all time is Phenomena, which is created by Mel Galley from Whitesnake, Trapeze, his brother Tom Galley. Excuse me, let me do that again. Like, one of my favorite AOR projects ever is Phenomena, which was created by Mel Galley from Whitesnake, Trapeze, his brother Tom Galley, as kind of this superstar concept record. And I wouldn't have known of this thing. Clear Channel bought up all the radio stations ages ago. All they play on classic rock radio is AC/DC, Pink Floyd, and like a smidgen of the Beatles if you're extra lucky and a super good boy. And it's always late era Beatles. It's never the Mersey beat stuff. So it's like, I wouldn't have even known of this. I wouldn't have known who Glenn Hughes is. The only Deep Purple song they ever play is Smoke on the Water and Highway Star if you're an extra special good boy on that day. So it's like, the internet, for all intents and purposes, I do hold as a net positive, and it's through platforms like YouTube that I'm able to reap those rewards. Like, last year, I had gone on a big kick with who is essentially one of the great pop idols of all places, New Zealand, Sir Dave Dobbin. And I love his music now. I wouldn't have even known the man existed. He could have kept living in New Zealand for the entirety of his natural-born life. God love him. He's still alive and still playing. And absolutely, I love him to death for it. But it's like, I wouldn't have known this man existed. He had an entire career as like this legend on the other side of the planet. And I can now find that through the power of YouTube. And so it's like, that's terrific. But at the same time, if I wasn't connecting with the medium of music, if I wasn't using YouTube to find rare films, if these were just content to me, flash in the pan, something you scroll past on your, when you're bored on your lunch break and you need stimulation to keep the voices at bay.
Yeah.
These wouldn't leave a single impression on me. And that kind of terrifies me, because I know that even for people nowadays, it has gotten to the point where all of this blends into each other for people. Like, I obviously respect and frankly worship the power of a good film or a good, audio production or a good song or album. But for a lot of people, TV is just content. Films are just content. Music's just content. Everything. I love the way we've shouted him out so many times on this channel, and I'm going to keep shouting him out too until I'm blue in the face or until he hits 100,000 himself. But Haji Gaviota always makes this point in every one of his videos, which is, in his case, he specializes in music. He's an independent artist. And he always says this: music isn't just competing with other music. It's competing with everything, the entire internet. It's competing against everything that's vying for your attention in the algorithm. And that's the thing that makes a platform like YouTube or a TikTok so scary, is everything being put into the same slurry of content. If you find the people you like and you're willing to sit and wait for them to make their videos, because sometimes they take 2 weeks, a month, sometimes they drop quarterly, that's great. But for a lot of people, they just throw it on. It's all the background noise. We talked about, like second screen viewing. I'm sure people second screen view YouTube and TikTok now at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and also I think I'd like to roll it back slightly to the discussion about the way that you, or at least the attitudes around things like YouTube and whatnot versus film and music and things like that. But and I think that this is starting to creep in to newer movies and things like that. But I think it will always be most prevalent with short form content videos. It's that the optimization process is so much easier. So while you might look at the epic rap battles of history, for example, and you say, well, how did they know what they were doing? Well, they were just chasing something that they wanted to do. That's the first gen of YouTube by and large. And then because of the medium, because you are creating something, a YouTube video that takes a month to produce is, I would say, probably on the long side of average. For most channels, I think 2 weeks is generally pretty common, or less, really. And whenever you have that quicker feedback loop and you don't have big production time, the ability to iterate and thus optimize is much greater. And so you've seen the medium and the what would you say, the output of all this move, I think, faster than any other medium, really, in terms of adapting itself to chase trends, to try and figure out what gets those metrics. So it comes to a point where even if you're trying to create something just because you want to create it, if you want it to be seen, there's a real incentive to put these kinds of terms, that the optimization ideas into your head in a way that I think is generally scorned in most other mediums. And it's scorned, I would say, on YouTube as well to a certain degree, but it's everybody at the end of the day then kind of admits, yeah, but it is pretty important, we got to pay attention to these things. And I think it gives gives the medium a very different, and the website and all this short form content, a very different feel than you get from older, slower forms of media.
I'd agree with that, especially because a lot of people who are also in this, especially when you're in the shall we say, the cannibalistic part of the content cycle, which is of course the drama tubers and the people that explicitly the slop content, as low as I am to say the word, because it's one of those things where, because trends and concepts now are being spread and exposed at such a rapid rate, these terms it's not that they lose power, it's that they become so commonplace. It's almost like trends. You almost wonder if we are going to reach that point of there being like a trend singularity where something just happens for like a split second and then it's like, oh, that was neat for the 2 milliseconds I experienced it. How about another? And then it just keeps happening like that. Like you're at the black hole. You're at the event horizon of content trends. And the funniest thing, and the thing is, and the thing, what it becomes is it becomes this chicken and the egg situation where it's like creators will be like, look, when I do like a really nice long form video on something, it's like it's not getting watched. You know, whether it's not being recommended or if you guys just aren't coming to watch it. You know, because that's also part of the problem of a not even just a parasocial dynamic, but just the simple nature of being creator versus audience, is that unless you do have a international, you know, multi-continent, you know, theater tour talking about what it was like growing up being Jacksepticeye before he became Jacksepticeye, you don't actually get to really meet your audience. You might hang out with them in Discord servers. You might become friends privately through DMs with other creators. But like all real relationships, those things build slowly. They build over time. And I think if there was any internet etiquette I would impart onto people my age, younger, and heck, let's be honest, probably older too, with how, you know, the tech literacy rates are always in flux. It's that always be suspicious of fast friends, because the relationships that last are the ones that take time. Like, let's spill the beans between me and Richard. I've never been in a room with this man. The closest we've ever been is our two boxes in Talk Studio sitting next to each other.
Yeah.
Or when we were on Iron Age Nights, you know, a couple of years ago, or whatever. But at the same time, it's not like I just all of a sudden one day waltzed up to this dude in the, you know, Discord server with the, I don't know, the banana duck or whatever it was your old PFP was.
Yes.
And be like, hey, you look like a cool dude. Let's be friends for life.
Yeah.
No, we were chatting it up when, you know, Razor Fist, aka the Rageaholic, spearheaded the concept of the Iron Age, and Richard wanted to get in on kind of helping foster that, and so he wound up incepting Iron Age Media, and because I had a project that I had incepted just around the same time, 365 Infantry, you know, hence the lovely Knight's helmet and the Terminator wolf, you know, we wound up being like, you know, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, bada bing, bada boom, wound up making a magazine together that we're still working on. All, you know, for a good, good God, what has it been, 2 years
Pretty
now?
much, yep.
Good Lord, that sounds terrible.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's strange. For one thing, I think the past 5 years since the truth arrived have been very strange. I think that they definitely mark a end of, I would say, maybe like an end of reluctance to identify people online as friends. I mean, I remember
I would agree with
when
that.
I was a kid. Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was a kid, like, you know, I think we might have mentioned the pod lobbies and whatnot previously, but you know, you would, these were just strangers that you would swear at for I think it was like 60 seconds before the match and then like 30 seconds at the end of the match. And you know, if there's proximity chat, you could insult them and you know, maybe even talk to them slightly. But I think the closest to having any kind of online people that I would identify as friends at all prior to the 2010s was for a strange little game called Chrome Hounds. It's a mech game that had a major online component, and I joined a group, kind of one of those guilds or whatever that you would have in a more traditional MMO, and played with them for a while. But you know, even as I got into EVE Online, which is another MMO, and a few of these people would, you know, actually have each other's phone numbers, but it was still very strange. You know, it was like, these are the core people who are holding together a guild or a, you know, a clan, if you will, corporation in the case of EVE. of 200, 300 people, and there's about 5 of them that actually have a way to contact each other outside of, at the time before Discord, it was TeamSpeak, or actually before Discord, it was Slack, and then before Slack, it was TeamSpeak, So there's been, I would say, a growing acceptance of online relationships, if you will, during the 2010s that pairs with this form of media that I think is worth, at least considering to some degree. And now, I mean, geez, it's everybody has a Discord, and there's plenty of jokes, shall we say, about meeting your fans on Discord and DMing them and things like that, which is always a whole new wave of bizarre negligence that's come out of these creators that have that weird dynamic sometimes that some people just can't handle, And I think as things are still growing, things are still changing and iterating. We have not hit a sort of what would you call it? An equilibrium point, like we did with Hollywood or rock bands.
I'd say it's either an equilibrium or even just a simple stasis. Like a point of stasis might be the way to look at it, just because. And here's the issue too: it's because you only have the eternal present to really consider. You can't really sit down and because whenever people think about the future, it's always we're thinking about it in science fictional terms. We're always thinking about, what's 100 years in the future, 500 years in the future, millennia in the future. We're never sitting here considering what the hell is going to be the state of YouTube in the future. What's going to be the state of TikTok in the next 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
We're always thinking about these in terms of the now. And I think because of that, it is always hard to really find when that equilibrium is, because the closest that really happened was back in kind of the 2010s heydays was the development of channel, I guess it would be the managerial class, like the media groups that a bunch of channels would be labeled under. I remember Matthew Patrick, Matt Pat over at Game Theory, famously had a row with one of these media groups for essentially defrauding their entire channel network of hundreds of thousands, I think, if not millions.
Yeah.
And that was a big, big thing in and around, I think it was 2017 or 18. I think it was Defy Media was the company in question. And so it's kind of, you have, black days like that, but at the same time, it's also the time when, you have the birth of the idea of YouTube sponsorships. You have the acceptance of YouTube by mainstream establishment talents. Like I'd mentioned earlier with Epic Rap Battles, they were getting actual traditional media celebrities like a Snoop or like a T-Pain to do, to gig on a battle. And so you do still have elements of crossover that certain creators that certain creatives from other spaces would acknowledge and would openly embrace. And we've gotten to the point where now YouTube is just part of the press tour. People are going on freaking, Hot Ones and going on, various
that
podcasts
is an angle
here, there,
for
and
sure.
everywhere.
My thinking also though is with the consumers of the media, right? So if you're watching a movie, how do you interact with the actors, or the key people in this? I mean,
I see where you're going with this, which essentially the correct answer would be you barely do so at all.
Yeah, but
the most you wind up doing is if you're at if you're at, say, one of the big world premieres and the actual stars are there, or if, say, you go to a film festival, like if you go to Cannes or if you go to
Mhm.
TIFF, or if you go to Sundance and, the actual director's there and some of the cast is there, that is, that is kind of one of, and of course, if there's like a Q&A,
Yeah.
is probably the closest that some people get.
Well,
Or
and
if you go
now
to
there's been the
conventions and some people are
rise.
set up at a table.
Yeah, there's been the rise of things like fan comic cons and stuff like that. But those usually are um, fan meets and things like that. But those usually are still extremely structured, you know, and so you have that, and then what's the interaction with a musician? Well, you go to the concert, and if you're a groupie, you throw yourselves at them as best you can. Otherwise, you just kind of look at them, and maybe if you're really fond of them and you're a dude, you throw a beer can and do your best to clock one of them in the skull. It's
Just
there's
a quick sidebar. Just a quick. I just have to throw this in. I do think one of the funniest stories about that is when Wasp's guitarist Chris Holmes got a rump roast thrown at him during a concert, and he was like seeing stars. Like it was a frozen rump roast they threw at the man.
that's bizarre.
Just that is terrible. Wouldn't expect anything less
I've
from a metal audience. Let's be real.
Yeah, I've never that's a new story to me. But uh, anyway, but the interaction with the audience itself is very different. Whereas with and even it's still true for authors and artists to a certain degree. Yes, you could seek them out in some way. Maybe there were book signings and things like that, but generally speaking, it was still a very different kind of experience because once again you weren't spending as much time with these people. And I think that another factor to be considered is just the volume of media that a lot of these people produce is just unheard of compared to basically any other form of media there. Like if you sat down and watched every single Tom Cruise movie, just no matter what role he played in it, I'm sure that would take you a
Like
good amount of
everything, like
time.
every, I was about to say everything from like Endless Love to the latest Mission Impossible. Yeah, no, that'd take you a good heavy chunk of time.
Yeah, but regardless, there are dozens of streamers, and in fact, just to make it as a streamer, you're going to produce more content than that, probably in just a few months, if not certainly within a year. So every year of your
Oh no,
your
one
career,
hundred percent.
you're cranking out
I
more.
mean, say no, absolutely. I mean, say what you will about big guys like Hassan Biker. I mean, that man's on stream for about what 6-8 hours
Yeah,
a
a
shot.
ludicrous amount of time. Yeah, I don't. I have no understanding of like. I mean, I guess if you just make money by turning on the stream, but he already has money. I don't understand anything about that situation. But um, not to get too far afield on that, but it's just it, it's a new world. It's a new frontier in that regard, and I think that while people are quick to condemn content, I think that it's also you know it's difficult to completely dismiss what is succeeding. And I think it's unwise to just turn your nose up at something like, well, TikTok is
I think
bad, therefore, it's beneath me. Um, it can be beneath you as a creator if that's what you want, but it's still there and it's still growing and absorbing a lot of time from people.
though I will say I think the most important distinction to make in all of this in kind of this new media era is that idea of niching, of niching out, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
Because here's the truth. If you want to just play the numbers game, if you want to chase after, the coattails of a Jimmy Donaldson or, any major, massive YouTube talent of the past 10 years, give or take, you can. I mean, by all means, you can take your shot at it, kid. But it's going to mean treating it as a full-time business. You'd have to be a better businessman than a content creator. Because the content creation, the content is subject to whatever is in vogue,
mm-hmm.
vaguely trendy, what formats work, what things are your audience, whatever audience you're aiming for. If you're aiming for the broadest audience possible, that means you have to aim for the most universally palatable. I mean, I think that's kind of the joke about the whole Mr. Beast thing. I mean, just tuck the scandals away, tuck all the hearsay, all the gossip drama. The baseline element of this man's format is he's giving away money to people who run a gauntlet of challenges, and there's always some semi-personal angle sprinkled in throughout in a video that is cut like an action trailer for 25 minutes a shot. I mean, I've sat down and I tried to watch 90 minutes of that man's content, and I thought I was getting whiplash. I felt my head spinning off my neck like a bad action figure. I mean, my God, it was moving way too fast. And to be fair, I was the 12. Well, let me make the point. I was the 12-year-old who could sit down and watch 2001: A Space Odyssey without falling asleep. So I might just be a genetic freak on this point. But at the same time, his stuff gets millions of views. And heck, he's even now part of the Missing Link Media Syndicate because he wound up getting a reality game show with Amazon Prime, Beast Games. So not only is he linking out from YouTube, he's linking out specifically into a more traditional media format. Obviously streaming isn't traditional television, it's not cable, but Donaldson's MO is no different than a Survivor or any of the big game show crazes of the 2000s. The only difference is that it's, to put it politely, running on Adderall and a dream. It's moving at the speed of light. And yet, he still has a sizable fan base. A lot of them are young kids now. It's now parents who are having to act like boomers, being like, who's this Mr. Beast guy? Because I don't care about what my children watch anymore. So now they're having to get into the loop and figure out what the heck this is, other than, oh, my kid likes his stuff, and he doesn't say any naughty words, or he doesn't do anything terrible, in his videos anyways. And if you wanted to chase that trend, I mean, go for it. But the funniest thing, too, is the trends are happening so fast and so furiously. Not only is his style falling out of vogue, like people are noticing that the thumbnails aren't hitting the same markers of success. The style of people who talk like this in every single voiceover, that's starting to get on people's nerves, and so people are starting to do less of that kind of cadence. Because, I mean, literally, people will clone this man beat for beat, line for line, trying to get the formula to go again. And you see, as you go deeper and deeper and deeper into a case study like his, you see how much of the content creation game becomes pure business. I'm not even talking about, oh, my art, I'm an artiste. No, I'm talking about simply just getting engagement, period. Just what it takes to get noticed. But the secret is that if you instead of going for this total, trying to go for this total world domination thing, if you have a specific passion and a specific interest you want to hone in on, you can, because there is an audience for everything today. Everything. Big, small, any media interest, any historical interest, any technological, scientific interest. There is a space for everything because of how all-encompassing the internet has become. There is a total space here that not only is just, oh, I'm trying to become this totality, but that's also kind of the beauty of the internet. It's that there is room for everything. You don't always have to play this hyper obsessive numbers game with the kind of, anything you want to make. Call it content, call it entertainment, call it art if that's what you believe you're making. But there is room for everything. People joke about it, but there are still people who enjoy literary fiction. There are probably spheres of YouTube that focus solely on literary fiction. There are people that probably focus solely on, grindhouse exploitation cinema, because the horror community is an incredibly large, incredibly diverse, incredibly engaging community. So there's still tons of people who are cut from that cloth and who still make a fine, decent living from it. So my big thing with kind of the looking at a TikTok or at kind of like the most base level broadband version of YouTube is that you don't have to. It's an option, but it's not the option.
Absolutely. And I think while it can be disheartening for creators to look at these numbers and say, oh man, this is what's successful, I think that they should also keep in mind that the first wave of people who are most successful, and a lot of the people who are popping off now, they all chase their passion. And if you lean into the things that are most exciting to you and most interesting to you and really pursue those things, if you can do things that bring you joy and bring you energy, you're going to be miles ahead of somebody who's just trying to optimize for everything. And not that you shouldn't pay attention to that to some degree, but that's the strength of, decentralizing things and everybody being able to niche down and find out what they're best at. Because there's almost always, if something is done well, there's an audience for it.